All right, just some things I would like to go over on your, basically regarding your first week's essays and the concepts in the first week. As you remember, I really wanted to, or actually the second week, the essay for the second week, what I really wanted to get into was the characterization of the evolutionary process as the consequences of replication, variation, and selection. I mentioned that from the very beginning in the first online lecture, and then you read about it in a number of items. And then, of course, you wrote your essays describing replication, variation, and selection in some organism of your choice. The essays looked quite good. You've got the essays back with the comments written on them. And that's how I'll be returning your material to you. I write on it, I scan it as a PDF, and send it back to you with the grade. You've got those back. There are just a couple of issues that I wanted to bring up to make sure that everybody got it right. Most of you got it, but there are a couple people had a bit of confusion on one aspect, which was variation. Replication was straightforward. Everybody got that. Of course, life forms known to science today, all life forms are made of a series of proteins. There are about 20 proteins that all life forms known to science are made of. And, well, where do those cells come from? They come from a parent generation. They don't pop up spontaneously out of nowhere. They come from its parent generation, which is replication, and that was straightforward. And everybody found a species, and they described a little bit about the variables involved with replication. Variation, what I was really after was the variation among siblings of a particular generation, not variation among an entire species or within sort of a geographical range of a species. For example, the tigers have a very wide geographical range. There are the tigers in the almost in the Arctic, Siberia, and of course there are jungle tigers in a subtropical area like India, or it used to be anyway. Well, that's variation within a species. What I was talking about was variation among siblings of a given generation. It's that variation that, of course, selection acts upon. Now, selection is the differential survival of variable offspring. And those offspring, they vary by their... sorry, I was interrupted there briefly. Somebody came into the lab, which almost never happens. Anyway, I was talking about selection, variation. Variation, of course, was the differences, or the kind of variation that I was interested in here, is the variation that you get among siblings of a particular generation. So, one example that I gave was woodpeckers. They survive in part by their ability to hear grubs and other insects underneath the bark of a tree. And a tiny variation, let's say you have a brother and sister woodpecker, a tiny variation in their hearing structures would be perhaps a selective disadvantage to the one that can't hear quite as well, because it is still out there pecking around looking for food, whereas its sibling, which had a better capacity to hear, that sibling is more fit, we would call it in evolutionary terms. It is more fit and is more likely to find offspring and reproduce the genes that made a slightly better variation for hearing. That's essentially variation and the selection upon variation. Now, selection is a difficult concept, or it's easily misunderstood. Selection, even the word itself, I need to look it up, but essentially the word itself connotes that there is somebody doing the selecting, or that it's an active process, that it's doing something. It is actually not doing anything. There's no there to selection. Selection is simply the fact that some offspring do better in terms of reproduction than others. And that is based on the fact that some of them have variations that are more advantageous to the particular environment that they're born into. All of this is very straightforward and clear in the essential dogma of biology. These are the central tenets of biology, and if you were to find, or if you were to discover that these were false, or that any one of these is false, you would overturn all of Darwinian biology. And of course, you'd probably get a Nobel Prize for showing that we're all wrong about this, and that we need to start over. The central concept of, or the central unifying concepts of biology are as follows. Genotype, G-E-N-O-T-Y-P-E, genotype are the DNA, and they are the chemical strands, essentially, that direct the construction or the assembly of proteins into certain bodies, essentially. Those bodies are called the phenotype, P-H-E-N-O-T-Y-P-E. So genotype, DNA, instructs the construction of phenotype from the roughly 20 varieties of proteins. Phenotype is, I'm a phenotype. I am the thing constructed by the genes of my parents. You are a phenotype. A squirrel outside is a phenotype. Anything born from a parent generation, the thing that the DNA instructs the construction of, that's the phenotype. And it is the thing that interacts with the world outside the gene. The phenotype itself is immersed into or born into what we call a selective environment. A selective environment. That is the world of selective pressures, the world of issues that a phenotype has to solve in order to survive. Selective environments are massively complex. You can't draw a line around them. Anything, essentially, that affects your fitness, your probability of passing your genetic material on to the next generation, anything at all that affects that fitness score, essentially, is a selective pressure. And phenotypes are born into selective environments that they have to endure to survive. Or that they have to endure. And if they are able to endure because of a selective advantage in one characteristic or another, then they propagate that DNA to the next, or that characteristic is propagated to the next generation. So genotype DNA builds phenotypes. Phenotypes are born into selective environments. Selective environments cull out the variations in the phenotypes that come from the DNA construction. Selective environments select out certain characteristics and promote other characteristics, and that's essentially the evolutionary process. Now, there is an infinitude of detail that we could go into with any one of these topics. There's the entire, I was just reading this morning a paper about symbiosis, the phenomenon, the world of organisms that co-evolve very closely and intimately with other organisms. For example, humans, we have about 1,000 species of bacteria alone living in our gut, in our digestive tract. We have 400 species alone living in our mouths. And we carry around, we co-evolve with those organisms. So you could spend an entire career just investigating replication or variation or selection, or all of the many details that occur within those three processes of the evolutionary process. Today, then, I'll be posting this video. I'll also post a number of readings that have to do with the microprocesses of evolution, and then, of course, I'll assign your readings from the text. All right, I think that's all I wanted to talk about today.